My friends at Easy Cater are workplace catering pros, helping you find food for everything from daily employee meals to staff meetings and special events. Visit easycater.com/leaderassistant to find out more.
Hi, this is Michelle de Guzman. Today's leadership quote comes from Gideon Yu. Truly thankful for great friends and colleagues who tell me the hard truths that allow me to become better.
The Leader Assistant podcast exists to encourage and challenge assistants to become confident, game-changing leader assistants.
Thank you for listening to the Leader Assistant podcast.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Leader Assistant podcast. It's your host, Jeremy Burrows, and we are at episode 87, and I'm excited to share my interview. But first, just wanted to remind you all to check out leaderassistant.com/community. We have a thriving Facebook community, a Slack workspace group where we share job opportunities, encourage each other, ask for help with a variety of EA projects and things related to our roles, and sometimes things not related to our roles. So Slack, Facebook, and we also do weekly Zoom chats on Wednesday afternoons. So leaderassistant.com/community, leaderassistant.com/community. Hope you can join us in our free Slack, Facebook, and Zoom communities. All right, we will jump right into today's episode. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Leader Assistant podcast. It's your host, Jeremy Burrows, and today I'm excited to be speaking with Michelle de Guzman. Michelle is Executive Assistant to Gideon Yu, co-owner and former president of the San Francisco 49ers. Michelle, how's it going?
I am doing really well. Hi, Jeremy. How are you?
I am doing very well as well, and I am in St. Louis, Missouri today. Are you in San Francisco, I'm assuming?
I am in San Francisco.
Awesome. So I'm hoping it's a little warmer there than it is here.
Not so much.
A little chilly today?
A little chilly.
So like 26 degrees or?
Not that chilly.
Nice. So tell us a little bit about how you ended up working with Gideon.
How I ended up working with Gideon. It's actually a very funny story. I was driving to work one day. This was 2014, and I had gotten a call from Valentina, a recruiter I met casually. And at the time, I was supporting the CEO of a small startup in California. But I had just given my notice, and I was a few weeks away from starting a new job. Valentina told me that there was a very important client looking for an assistant, and she instantly thought of me. I told her that I was flattered and thank you for thinking of me, but I was on my way to my dream company. And I remember her saying, do me a favor. When you stop driving, just Google him. And Jeremy, Googling him actually did not help. I took one look at his Wikipedia and said, yeah, there's no way I could support this guy. You know, I called Valentina and I thanked her for her time, but I was convinced that my experience was not strong enough to support someone like him. She pushed back and said, look at it this way. It would be cool to just have coffee with him. And she went on about how an opportunity to sit down with someone like Gideon doesn't come around like ever. So I ended up taking the interview. And the day we met for coffee was interesting, to say the least. Gideon had been running behind schedule, and there was another candidate meeting with him before me. But he was so late that I had already shown up for my meeting, and he wasn't even there yet. So I actually sat at the table next to him while he interviewed the other person. And I'm sitting there and I can hear the entire conversation. And I remember thinking, this girl's going to get the job. I mean, good for her. She has a master's degree, previous experience supporting a high net worth executive. All of her answers were so polished. And I'll never forget this part. She was wearing a cardigan, for crying out loud. I mean, she was just beyond perfect. And after her interview, she leaves and he moves to my table, which was literally the next one over. And the interview was very intense in the beginning. He asked a lot of questions. He asked about my lack of education. He asked about my GPA in high school. I mean, this interview was tough. And I remember I started sweating profusely in my button-up shirt with no cardigan. And now I'm thinking, good thing I'm not wearing a cardigan. And I'm doing the best I can with my answers just to get to the part where I can ask him questions. But then our conversation shifted to topics like family, my children, life in general. And after 2 hours of chatting about so many things, I'm thinking, crap, he would be a really cool boss. But still in my mind, this was not going to translate into a job. I had zero experience supporting such a high profile executive. And I'm sure that it is required for something like this. But a few days later, I got a call from Gideon. And this part to me is so unreal. It's usually like the hiring manager or the recruiter or Santa Claus or just basically anyone else but the executive calling you. And Gideon is telling me that I'm getting an offer. And at this point, I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is the time to come clean. It's gone too far. And I start giving him the old, it's not you, it's me speech, which as comical as it sounds, was 100% true. But he tells me that he understands I don't have the kind of experience he's used to. And while things like booking a private plane could be taught, certain characteristics could never be taught. And there were going to be mistakes made along the way, but he was okay with that. And after the call, I received the offer and I signed it. And the entire thing was so serendipitous to me. And I think because we were both completely transparent with one another in talking about work and home life, which would have been completely impossible had I felt the pressure of wanting the job. But since I was able to be so open with him, it created a sense of comfort that ultimately resulted in being paired with him naturally.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. I heard another story similar where it was like, hey, I'm just going to be honest and be myself in this interview, and I probably won't get it. But then they kind of the same thing happened where like they're really connected, and next thing you know, they got the job.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think some people tend to forget that an interview is a two-way street. Both parties are trying to determine if there's a fit. In my opinion, being brutally honest in that interview is crucial for longevity. I mean, here I am supporting Gideon roughly, 6 years later, and I definitely owe that to the transparency that happened in our first conversation.
So how has your partnership evolved over that 6 years?
Well, Gideon and I have an incredible partnership. I'm asked about my opinion in various parts of the business and just in life in general. And I definitely have a voice. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, Gideon and I were discussing the possibility of adding a second assistant to our two-person team. We talked about pros and cons, how would we divide the workload, and people he thought might be a good fit. And personally, I wasn't on board with the idea. I didn't feel like it was the right solution. I think he could kind of see my lack of enthusiasm through my demeanor. And at that point, I remember him asking me, okay, so who would you hire? And at this time, I spent most days at the audio company, and I began to take notice of a very ambitious product manager. He had this incredible story of driving to California with no job, just trying to make it. But curiously enough, he wasn't becoming BFFs with anyone at work, meaning that a lot of people didn't like him. So I went around the office asking why people didn't like this guy. I mean, just very direct data collection. Like, what are these reasons? And the reasons people gave me actually made me like this guy even more. I mean, I won't say the reasons on the podcast, but I began to realize pretty quickly this was someone I can easily respect. And I remember suggesting this guy to Gideon, and he was extremely confused and asked, I mean, you would hire him as my second assistant? And I said, no, the question is, who would I hire? Anyway, Gideon ended up giving this guy a job, totally took a chance on him. He's proven to be such an asset, not only to Gideon, but to our now 3-person team. And I think it's been a little over 2 years. And the kid who drove from Iowa to California was promoted to Chief Operating Officer. So going back to your question, our partnership has evolved tremendously. And I think in the beginning, I was too timid to speak up. And there was a part of me where I was unsure if speaking up would matter or if it would make a difference. But I can say that all of the times I did speak up, it did matter. And more times than not, it made a huge difference.
That's great. Yeah, it's interesting how, over time you can get that. But what do you think it was that, were there other times where you didn't speak up and it went poorly and that kind of made you think, oh, I should probably speak up next time? Or was it just simply you built more trust and got more comfortable with the working relationship?
I think it was just coming into my own. I think it had nothing to do with the executive that I was working with, but more so just being comfortable in my ability to assess a situation and give recommendations. And I think that just happened with me personally over time.
Awesome. So when and why did you become an assistant? Were you an assistant before working with Gideon?
Well, I started off as a receptionist at a small firm back in 2004. And I had just given birth to my now 16-year-old daughter, whom I had when I was 20 years old. And to be completely honest, I took the receptionist job mostly because I was hungry, and not in the deep, profound way that Steve Jobs meant, but in the literal way that I needed to feed myself and my family. And a few months into my new job, the CEO asked me to support him. At that time, I had no idea what the role meant or what it entailed or what it could mean for the future. But because I am incredibly reactive and learn things very easily, I was able to complete projects and then move on to the next task pretty instantly. And so that alone sort of helped me lock in a huge chunk of time just learning by experience, which in retrospect was huge for me since I don't have a college degree. So I really got that big break by working hard and people taking notice. And by 2011, I had just given birth to my son and was working full time as a single mom. So I decided at that time I needed to make a move. And I remember Googling, quote, best places to work, mom, end quote. And after several hours of online research, I decided I wanted to be in tech. I studied all the skills that were needed, and I took a grueling job at a startup and cried myself to sleep every night the whole time, but toughed it out to get that tech experience on my resume. And then it was during that time I was introduced to my current executive. And so, like many EAs, I sort of fell into the role. And while the reason I became an EA was not by choice, the reason that I stay in EA is absolutely my choice. I really enjoy what I do, and it never feels like work to me. I mean, does it take up a lot of my time? Sure. But it doesn't feel like I'm using a lot of my energy on it, even though the work itself is pretty significant.
That's great. So do you have any stories about crazy times when you saved the day?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, there is one story that stands out. I think probably because this was the moment when I realized that networking was an important part of being an EA. It was back in 2016, and Pokemon announced it would hold its world event in San Francisco. And what that is, it's this huge annual competition that they host in different parts of the world. And that year it was in California. So naturally, my boss wanted to take his son. And I think an EA's job consists of various tasks. And I find that most of these one-off requests, for me anyway, are always things you have never dealt with in the past. Therefore, it's very unlikely you'll have a contact or even know where to begin. And in my earlier days, I would immediately hit the ground running. I mean, I had no idea where I was running towards, but I mean, it felt productive just to get started. But having a bit more experience, I now understand the value of sitting at your desk, just thinking. And I'm thinking, gee, how easy would this be had the event not been invitation only? I mean, I could buy the passes online, email them to my boss, and call it a day. But it never works out that way. And so I'm sitting at my desk thinking of ways to approach this. And I think, okay, maybe I could see if the venue can get some passes, and I'll chat with one of those concierge companies that gets tickets for things like the Oscars. And of course, I'll reach out to Pokemon. Reaching out to the venue was a bust. They stressed it was a private event and didn't have any passes. So I reached out to Pokemon through their contact form on their website and was told that they didn't have any public passes. And so finally, my last hope was the concierge company. And after weeks of battling with them on if we can even get this done, they finally agreed to secure 2 passes for $25,000. I mean, just a mere $25,000. While, I should be jumping up and down because I'm finally able to get to my goal and complete this project, I wasn't very satisfied with the terms. So, I mean, I'm thinking to myself, there's got to be another option. And my gut is telling me that Pokemon is going to be the best way to get these passes if they're available to the public. So I went on LinkedIn and searched for Pokemon employees in Seattle, specifically employees with a marketing title, because they would be involved with the event. I finally reached out to someone, introduced myself, explained how Jonathan, who is my boss's son, was a huge fan, and asked if there was any chance of snagging a few spectator passes. I get a response back a few days later and was told, they don't sell the passes, but would just love to host Jonathan anyway. And, at this point, I'm so thrilled. I'm like jumping up and down at my desk. I'm celebrating, and I'm just so happy. And I remember I had to come to the venue the day before to get the passes and met with the person whom I connected with on LinkedIn. We had a cup of coffee. We chatted for a while, and she's a very lovely person. And, this was such a pivotal moment for me. I realized how powerful networking could be, and also just the art of being a solution collector and figuring out which solutions to shelf and which to put in front of your boss and actually use. And, what's really incredible is that all of that materialized from a simple message on LinkedIn.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, LinkedIn is pretty powerful. I mean, that's how we met, I think. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it was through LinkedIn. It's awesome.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I loved your resourcefulness and just kind of reaching out and thinking, all right, well, who's going to be in charge of this event? Who's going to be working on it? Who would have maybe an inside scoop? So that's great. Yeah, EA magic.
Oh, absolutely.
So, what do you love about the role of an assistant?
The EA role is so powerful. You're at the table with some of the brightest minds, and as a result, EAs will subconsciously pick up skills from their executive. They become influential, they're negotiating deals, and you really become an executive in your own right. A close friend of mine is a hardware engineer at Facebook, and the Facebook campus is close enough to my office that I can occasionally have lunch with him. And over lunch one day, he tells me that when some of the admins walk around the campus, other employees clear a path so they can walk by. I mean, it doesn't get more badass than that, right? I mean, and so I really love how assistants are massively respected. Being a leader doesn't require a title. I mean, it's a characteristic, and many of the EAs I've partnered with over the years could easily become CEOs in the future.
Yeah, I love it. I think being an EA is, you mentioned not having a degree. I think being an EA for a few years is better than a MBA degree or some master's degrees, just because you get so much real world, hands-on business experience. So,
yeah, absolutely.
So, any tips for working with high-profile executives?
So supporting a high-profile executive is not for everyone. I mean, you have to be available at all times and be prepared for anything. I literally have my cell phone taped to my body. I mean, which might sound pretty standard as an EA, but at this level, it's not simply a matter of just being online and available. I mean, we deal with constant international time differences. So you might need to wake up at 3 a.m. to ensure, the flight crew is ready and the driver is in position. And you're basically awake anytime your boss is awake. There's a movie called The Devil Wears Prada, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. My husband hates it because we've watched it so much. But it's a pretty accurate portrayal of the role, in my opinion, except that the executive is much nicer in real life. But there's a scene where the assistant is scrambling to find a flight for her boss, and she's clearly out, at a social function. And it's so relatable to me. And while it's not your boss's intention to disrupt your plans, it happens. And you've got to be ready and willing to adjust with absolutely zero notice. And also, as an EA, you work very closely with your boss, and it will show if you don't love your job. And we all know why people take jobs that they don't particularly like. I actually went to school to become a nurse. I'm from the Philippines, and all Filipino parents want you to get into nursing. And I gather this is because the pay is relatively good. But during my clinicals, we would care for elderly patients, and some of them would pass away. And I'd get really emotional, and I cried a lot. And I remember a veteran nurse came in to talk to our class about their journey becoming a registered nurse. And he said something that I still to this day carry with me. He said, "Whatever you do, don't do it for the money." And shortly after that, I dropped out of nursing school. And the point here being that you are well compensated for your role as a 24/7 EA, but I'm not sure the money will be worth the unhappiness. I mean, you're trading your life in exchange to do a job. I mean, you should love it if you can. So if you're like me and truly enjoy the role, you completely understand the demands of it, and want to work with a high-profile executive, my tips are: think big, be humble, cast really wide nets, and stay hungry. And not in the literal sense, but for growth, for accomplishments, for interactions with people, and just stay hungry for what's going to happen next.
Love it. What would be a tip or maybe something you've done to stay humble?
I think that I'm just naturally humble. And I think that being an EA kind of exercises that skill for me, or not skill, but characteristic. And I don't really like the limelight, I guess. And even though I am fantastic at my job, I never feel like I'm fantastic at my job. I'm always looking for ways to be better. I'm always looking for feedback, and I'm always looking to learn things from other people and not have it be as a negative thing to me, like, oh, why don't I know how to do this already? But I'm very grateful for the knowledge. And I think just always wanting to learn is very helpful.
Yeah, that's great. It's the idea of you don't have it all together and you can always learn is definitely a good way to stay humble. Awesome. Well, Michelle, thanks so much for taking time out of your night to share your story and just some tips for assistants listening. Is there somewhere we can find you online and connect and support what you're up to?
I am on LinkedIn. I think that's how we found each other. So I'm definitely on there.
Awesome. Well, I'll share your link in the show notes, and then we'll talk soon. Hopefully, we can meet in sunny San Francisco sometime. And thanks again.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Have a great night.
Thanks again to Michelle for a great interview. Please check out her on LinkedIn to say hi and thank her for being on the show. You can check out the show notes at leaderassistant.com/87. Have a good one and keep leading well, friends.
Please review on Apple Podcasts. GoBulls.com